Right. Well, good afternoon, everyone. We're really excited for today's meeting. For those that are in the house, thank you to Nick for lunch. We went with Panda Express today and everyone's like impressed right now that we're getting
That's delicious.
And for records, anyone that's online, I will note that you're here. Dr. John, you're welcome. And Mr. Hunters.
Yeah, well, thanks for coming. My name is John Valines from Modesto Gospel Mission, and I am the acting chair of EDC and on the board here at the chamber. And so I just want to go around the room. I'll start with our esteemed colleague in the corner, Mr. Russell, my longtime boss.
So anyway, I'm Cecil Russell. That's enough.
He's my predecessor.
Good afternoon, everybody. Kelly Felton Martin, General Manager and Chamber Board Member. Janina Todora with Labor Finders Branch 1. First Juliet, Chamber Board Chair.
Me, Trish Christensen, CEO.
Already introduced myself.
Trevin Barber, Modesto Economic Development Manager.
Dana Ferrer, Government Relations, Modesto Irrigation District.
Gavin Klein representing College and Don Moore.
Monica.
Hi, everyone. Monica Flynn, Economic Development Manager, Opportunity Stanislaus.
Alfredo.
Alfredo representing Congressman Tom McClintock.
All right. Well, before we get started, we have to approve our minutes from the last meeting. This is April, and this is Stanco's meeting. If anyone wants to make a move, Cecil, you want a second? All right, Peggy, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Right, so moved. So with that, Nick, thank you for lunch. Again, as Trish hinted, we normally don't get exquisite cuisine like Panda. It's mostly sandwiches, so this is a welcome break. Although I will say Kelly's in the room, so she did a great job. We were at the mall and we ate at Buffalo Wild Wings, and that was a great lunch. So anyways, go ahead, Nick, when you're ready.
Sure. Well, I'm jealous. You know, I had apples and cheese for an early lunch, so I would love some orange chicken. So those of us who are remote are definitely wishing we were in the room. First off, my name is Nick Ortiz. I'm Vice President, Small Business Advocacy for Cal Chamber. If those of you may or may not know what Cal Chamber is, Cal Chamber's the state's largest broad-based business advocacy organization. We have just about 14,000 members representing, really all aspects in nearly every sector of California's economy. And then our companies collectively employ about a quarter of California's private sector workforce. So significant economic impact from our members. Wanted to, I have a presentation and I'll start to share my screen in just a second, but always want to start off, first off by, giving some kudos and some props to our local chamber partners. In Trish Christensen, you really have a very engaged and excellent chamber executive. We really look forward to working with her. We appreciate her responsiveness. So you've got really a great team there. And then, props to all of you. I'm a former chamber executive. I ran the Greater Bakersfield Chamber, just down the 99 from you all for 8 years. Spent just under 11 on staff there, and really think my experience at the chamber really contributed to my overall career, but also the thing that I got an appreciation of is just how important chambers are to our communities. And for those of you who are involved as volunteers, how important it is for you to continue to be engaged and involved. I mean, the chamber is the place that I like to say is where, business and the community kind of meet. And, one of the things that I think, especially at this point in time, that business doesn't get enough credit for is how important it is, not just in terms of economic impacts or providing jobs, but the industries that make up a region really reflect its identity. Like you can't separate movie making from Hollywood, even though, movies are made in Georgia and Canada these days, but, that is part of their DNA culturally as a region. It is the industry sector that makes that, that cultural identity. And, you can't separate Silicon Valley from the Silicon chip, even though largely, semiconductor manufacturing is not really done in California anymore. But again, it's about that cultural identity. I mean, it'd be trying to separate, for instance, Gallo from the Modesto region. All of these, industry sectors are so important. And I think chambers are so important at pushing that message out there, that not only are businesses providing taxes and jobs, but they really, help us define what it means to be a community. And then also, I think, what I've seen in my time is just how important it is, and chambers are really a great vehicle for harnessing the power of the business community to do like great things, to actually make positive community change. We see it all the time throughout the state. And, again, I don't think our business community in the state or our local chambers get enough credit for that really, really integral role that they play in helping our communities thrive. So with that, I'm going to share a presentation. I'm going to provide kind of a overall legislative update, talk about job killers, and then talk about a couple of things that I think are interesting in terms of trends, and then be open for your questions. I'll try to pause at points along the way, just to give an opportunity for any comments or questions. And then finally, as a preamble, just want to also just thank you for allowing me to be remote. We have a series of large events next week, and I have some travel at the end of this week, and so being remote was a real help to me. So I apologize that I'm not there in person, but thank you for bearing with me and allowing me to present virtually. So again, just wanted to kind of give you a sense of what's going on in Sacramento, what's happening, and I think it's really important to reflect not just on our current state, but what got us here. And I will not go back years into the past, but really just when you look at a legislative sessions in California are 2-year sessions after an election, leading up to an election where the entire assembly and half of the Senate are up for re-election. What we saw last year, I think, is really important to where we find ourselves in terms of the legislation that came out of the Capitol last year, and what set the stage for what we're seeing in 2024. So 2023, what we saw was significant turnover in the legislature. We saw nearly a third of the Senate turnover in terms of having new legislators. So there were 34 new legislators out of a total of 120, 80 in the Assembly, 40 in the Senate. We saw a record number of bills being introduced. We saw more than 2,600 bills introduced across both houses. And then we saw significant pressure on the governor, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. So just in terms of, what we saw with the makeup of the legislature, there being so many new legislators, and this really is the time where the reform that we did around term limits, allowing legislators to serve 12 years in either house as opposed to 6 years in the Assembly and 8 years in the Senate, has been helpful in terms of, trying to create some consistency in both houses and some policy expertise amongst some of the legislators. But also, just in terms of the overall demographics of the legislature and what we're seeing, we have a legislature that is, we have the most Democrats since the Civil War in the legislature. So we have a super duper majority. We have, one of the, youngest legislatures in terms of overall age. We have one of the most diverse in terms of overall demographics. And then, again, because of just a younger legislature, we have probably one of the, and this is, not necessarily meant to be a knock, just meant to be a statement, but in terms of professional experience, one of the least experienced legislatures that we've seen in modern times. Out of that record number of bills that were introduced last year, again, we also had some interesting dynamics that really led to not only that record number of bills being introduced, but also a significant number of those bills actually making their way through the entire legislative process. One of the things that happened last year was in around this time in the middle of the year, there was a switch over in terms of the speakership of the assembly. Former Speaker Anthony Rendon gave over control to the current Speaker Robert Rivas. You had that happening middle of the term. You also later in the term had the announcement of a changeover in leadership in the state Senate. The pro tem up until February of this year, Tony Atkins from the San Diego region was termed out, and Mike McGuire is the new pro tem as of February of this year. Interestingly, in terms of just the political realities of those two leadership, those folks that hold leadership in the Assembly and the Senate, Rivas's victory and his ability to capture the speakership was really propelled by progressive members of the Assembly caucus, while McGuire's clinching of the pro tem seat was really driven by the more moderate members of the Democratic caucus. So interesting dynamics with both of them. Again, you saw just over 1,000 measures get passed out of the legislature. And we do think this has something to do with one, significant number of new legislators and these leadership transitions that were either taking place or announced. The mechanisms that advocates on either side of an issue generally have, the committee process, the appropriations committee, especially for those of you who may not always be watching Sacramento and what's happening in the legislature, the appropriations committees of both houses have a function called the suspense file, where anything that has a price tag associated with it goes to the appropriations committee, and you can quietly kill a bill through the suspense file. And it goes there and it basically stays there until the committee chair decides that it moves out. Once a bill's placed on suspense, it very rarely actually makes it to a vote. So we didn't see a lot of that last year. And again, a lot of that has to do with these new legislators, this leadership changeover. So you saw, out of that 2,600 bills being introduced, just under half making their way to the governor and basically dumping it on the governor to be like, hey, you decide on these policies. And the governor, given all that legislative throughput, signed about 890 measures and vetoed 156 measures. Things that he signed, things that we're grappling with, and I'm sure, are topics in your region, and I hear it all across California as I visit with some of our local partners throughout the state. SB 525, AB 1228, this is minimum wage increases for healthcare workers and fast food workers, respectively. As you all probably know, the fast food worker minimum wage is in effect. SB 525 contained in some provisions to delay implementation. The governor took a significant amount of time to decide whether or not to sign 525, largely because of the impact to the state, given that the state employs a significant number of healthcare workers. So you saw 525 and AB 1228 go forward, and this is, again, we have seen, and there even is a proposal on the ballot to increase minimum wage broadly. But what we're seeing both in the legislature and in regions across the state is these more sectoral increases in minimum wage. And we're gonna, I think, see more of these going forward. SB 253 is another one that is a big one for us. SB 253 requires, those who are under, those companies that are under the state's cap and trade program to basically quantify what I'd call like the carbon intensity of their entire supply chains. So basically trying to quantify how much greenhouse gases go into their products across every supplier that they may have. So in a terrible example of like a frozen pizza, you would have to quantify how much emissions took to grow, to pick, to process the tomato that went into the sauce, in addition to the cheese that was on top of that sauce, etc. This bill is incredibly problematic just because we think it's going to be really, really hard to comply with. Small businesses that are in supply chains for companies that are under the cap and trade program are going to have an incredibly hard time actually quantifying this. And we do believe actually it could hurt some of the supplier diversity programs of some of those businesses that are under the cap and trade program. We're actually in litigation on this. We, along with the US Chamber, the American Farm Bureau Federation, a state agricultural association called Western Growers that you may be familiar with, and the Los Angeles and Central Valley Business Federations. We collectively sued the government on this just for a number of reasons. And there's another component, another piece of legislation that we also litigated on. That litigation just commenced earlier this year, and we are actively going through that. Don't have much to report there, other than the fact that I think even the administration saw problems with this policy and are looking, in addition to going through the process of defending the law in the courts, also looking at ways to do cleanup legislation to make it more clear about what this law will require. And then, just another highlight, an important one, SB 799. This is one where saw some interesting dynamics last year. We had what was called the hot labor summer in Southern California, where you saw the writer's strike, the director's strike, the Screen Actors Guild strike. You had hotel strikes, you had healthcare strikes, and you had a lot of labor activity. A senator from Southern California looking to run for Congress and to court some friendly labor support for that run for Congress, put this out there, and the legislature passed it. And the reason they passed it was the governor had said very early in the process that if this bill made it to his desk, that he would veto it. And the reason why he would veto it is because, as many of you know, the state's unemployment fund is funded by every business or every employer, not even business, because nonprofits, et cetera, pay payroll taxes. But every employer in the state pays into this, even those that don't have a unionized workforce, that do not have people who are striking. In addition, the UI fund is incredibly burdened right now. It's in debt for some structural issues, but also given the increase in the additive benefits that were given for unemployment during the pandemic. So this would just increase that debt and would be a de facto tax on all the employers that pay into the fund. So the legislature, and again, this is interesting just from the dynamics, given the governor said he was going to veto it and labor said it was a very high priority for them, it was a gimme. It was, why not vote for it if we're in a tough race and we're trying to court this particular labor stakeholder group. So it passed, and the governor was very much the adult in the room and vetoed it last year. Coming up in 2024, so we have a really similar kind of environment, a little bit different in terms of how the structures of both houses are working. But as we go into the election in November, there's a significant number of legislative seats that are up again. There's going to be 30 open seats in the state legislature, and the loss of some key business allies who have been very helpful, especially on the Senate side. This is really the last time for all sides, all stakeholders to influence the makeup of the legislature for the next decade. Because given those term limit changes and given that legislators can serve 12 years in either house, this is the last time that you're going to see this many open seats, and that you're going to see, these folks, some folks that were under the old term limit structure. So yes, definitely an interesting moment. And as we work on our political priorities going into the November election, one of the things that we're trying to do is work more closely with our local allies around what they're doing in some of these key races. Legislators introduced not quite 2,600 bills. They were a little bit down, but still a significant number of bills, just over 2,100 bills. What we've seen is, and I'll go into this in a little bit more detail in just a moment, retail theft and AI are really the top subjects of bills, but there are a number of things that we're watching. So just in terms of top issues, and like I said, public safety, retail theft is like one of the big issues right now. There is definitely a sense that the state must do something around this narrative that retail theft is out of control, especially organized retail theft. And that overall there is general concern over public safety. If you look at any poll, whether it's our polling that we do at Cal Chamber, whether it's the Public Policy Institute, whether it's private polling that we know the governor and his allies are doing, there is very, very much concern in the electorate about public safety. It is incredibly top of mind at the moment. What we're seeing just in terms of how that's gonna shape up, we have competing Senate and Assembly legislative packages. There's a range of things that they're talking about, including increased resources for some of these organized crime task forces. Looking at, one of the things, and I know we're probably all familiar with this $950 level for some of theft for something to be considered a felony. They're looking at being able to, and this is not a new concept, but being able to stack offenses together to get to that $950 level, but also looking to stack offenses across jurisdictions, so that if you're in one city or in one county and you have been cited for theft and something happens in another jurisdiction, potentially what might be able to happen is you could stack that and get to charging somebody with a felony. In addition, I'm not sure if your Stanislaus County district attorney has come in and talked to you all about the ballot measure that the District Attorneys Association and some public safety entities are really pushing. They have all but gotten the green light from the Secretary of State that this will qualify for the November ballot. They had until last week to turn in signatures. They turned in significantly more than what was required, and our belief, based on what we've seen, is that this will qualify. This goes a little further. The ballot measure goes a little further and actually reforms and does do some changes to the Prop 47, the proposition that was passed a few years back, that was really the cornerstone of this concept of criminal justice reform and realignment in the state. So generally what we think is going to happen is, these competing legislative packages, this ballot measure, it's really setting the stage for a negotiation. The parties have until late June to decide whether or not to keep the ballot measure on the ballot in November or to pull it. And so we'll see what happens during that time. We're having an event, like I said, next week for our stakeholders and local chambers and their members. And we'll have some folks, including the chair of the Senate Judiciary Committee and the chair of the Assembly's Select Committee on Retail Theft, talking about their priorities and what they're hoping to get done. One thing you may have heard of is the budget. The budget is the issue. It's kind of the overarching issue that's affecting state politics and policies right now. A few weeks ago, the legislature and the governor enacted early action measures to try to stem some of the issues around the deficit. The deficit is still looming, even though they did this early action. A lot of that was more deferrals, extending the timeline to pay things, as opposed to and some borrowing and fund shifts as opposed to real cuts. The governor in really just a few weeks is going to release what's called the May revision of the budget. And we'll get a better sense of where they're headed. We've been monitoring this, and we had even heard from the LAO's office just a few weeks back that they were seeing some positive trends in terms of state revenues. But reporting today shows that there is actually continued softness in state revenues. And so we're expecting still a sizable budget deficit that the legislature and the governor are going to have to deal with as they start negotiations after the governor unveils his May revise. Like I said, AI, artificial intelligence regulation, is a big topic. I think there's over 50 bills that are AI related, but they're like AI regulation bills. But if you actually look at like just where AI is referenced in legislation that's being proposed this year, I mean, really, it's in hundreds of bills. The interesting thing, and I think what our message is, what our company's messages are, and what the governor and what members of the legislature are really trying to do is trying to balance the need for regulating this burgeoning area of technology with an understanding that like the concentration of companies that are actually doing this innovation work are in California. And so this has the potential to be a huge economic boom for the state. And so how do we, get that balance right? How do we ensure for consumers and for users that, they feel safe in terms of AI, but also that we're not necessarily creating an environment that's going to be hostile to having that innovation take place in California and getting the economic impacts from having that innovation. Just in terms of, AI, I think, it's become like a bit of a boogeyman. I don't think we realize how much AI has already seeped into our daily lives. When we say, hey, Siri, and ask her a question, and, oh, my phone just pinged because she thinks I'm trying to talk to her, that's a form of AI. When we see these algorithms that give us, kind of shopping suggestions, if you're, on a Macy's site or an Amazon site, that can be considered some form of AI. So it's already, already in our daily lives, already part of what we use and how we utilize technology and these tools. My joke is that when I, am working on something and I'm utilizing like a chat GPT or something along those lines, I make sure to say please and thank you and call it you and will you, because when singularity happens and the Terminators come, I want them to know that I was the polite one that respected all the AI developments. And then finally, just there continues to be, and this is, I think this has only been just recently eclipsed as the top issue in the state by this really focus on public safety and retail theft recently, but that's homelessness. And homelessness continues to be one of the key issues throughout the state. The initiative that went forth, Prop 1 around, really realigning how the state doles out and then how the counties use this dedicated fund for mental health, and then also the accompanying bond, and then some changes to law are hopefully setting the stage for being able to turn the tide on this. But this is the issue, I think, still in a lot of ways in the public's mind. The issues of public safety and homelessness go hand in hand. While there is not necessarily causality between vandalism, broken windows, other types of things that are happening in downtowns or to small businesses and homelessness, at least in terms of when we poll voters in the state, and what we see is that in voters' minds, there's a clear linkage. There's a clear linkage between what has been seen as almost like the allowance of homeless encampments and street homelessness to pervade our communities, and a kind of permissive public safety or criminal justice environment. So, one of the things that's continuing to work through, and that the state is having to grapple with, especially as they're grappling with these budget issues, is how they're continuing to fund, the emergency response to, encampments, to what we see as, the chronically homeless as opposed to the situationally. And then also, how do they go forth and how do they implement some of the pieces of Prop 1, and how does it impact public safety? So these are just 4, but really, if you look at what's going on in the legislature, these issues really cut across all of the debates and discussions that are happening. So I think, yeah. So with that, I'll just pause real quickly to see if any comments, questions on kind of the legislative environment.
I'll throw a couple out there real quick.
Yeah.
Interesting listening to you talk about the pro tem. Senator Alvarado Gil has invited my chamber and Hispanic chamber to host her and the pro tem here on Friday, May 17th.
Oh, so, wonderful.
Yeah, so they'll be here. We actually haven't promoted that. We're waiting for approval from the senator's office on the flyer that's put together, but we're going to do an open forum with a focus on housing and insurance issues at the State Theater with panel discussions. So that should be.
Oh, wonderful. Yeah.
Yeah.
And we'd love to attend. So if you don't mind, if you could, if you send me information on that, I'm sure both myself and members of our policy team would love to attend if that's an option. I will say, and I know you had a couple of things, Trish, but we really appreciate Senator Alvarado Gil. You've got a great state senator, and one of the cool things, especially being a former chamber CEO and somebody who deals with our local chambers, is how focused her team is on engaging with the chambers in her district. And as you all know, her district is massive. So
talk about that often. We hosted her here for a GRC meeting, and she literally went over, pulled up a chair, took a seat right in the middle of the room, and just had a conversation. It was really interesting with her.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was just going to comment. So I met Nick when I was interim here. He doesn't know we met. I was listening to him present in classes at a couple different opportunities. He knows advocacy and this stuff. So when he moved up, and when Dave Kilby retired, he moved up over WACE, and then they moved him into all of this. This is right down his lane. So he's a great resource to us as well, and enjoy working with you and partnering with you.
Thank you. I appreciate that, Trish.
Our assembly member is Juan Alanis, and he is on a retail theft, and our county DA and our city police department all got grants on that. So it is on our list to bring them in, maybe even jointly present on this together in the next few months. We haven't invited them formally yet.
Excellent. And another one, love Assemblymember Alanis. Yes, just to hear him talk again. Like, you got some of the best, like, not just in terms of connectedness to the community, but like, I would say entertaining and plain spoken, like, legislators in your neck of the woods.
We have a lot of new ones, so we have a lot of them from here. Any other thoughts or questions so far?
So I have a question. I work for the Gospel Mission, which is a homeless shelter and program, and several we have here in town. And one of the things that we're hearing, and maybe you could just shed some light on this, is that with Prop 1 passing, a lot of we don't take much government money, but Salvation Army and there's a lot of grants come through the county here. But that a lot of that is going to be shut off, and it's almost all going to be funneled to only mental health facilities, mental health services, and no longer necessarily dealing with actual shelter services. Is that kind of what you're hearing?
So, I mean, it's going to depend. I mean, at the end of the day, it's going to depend on the local plan and how much of the local MHSA dollars that is that Prop 1 pool was going towards homelessness now. at a previous point in my career, I ran a continuum of care process. And also, for years, I've served on the board of our local homeless center in Bakersfield. So I know enough about this issue to be quasi-dangerous. So, I mean, it really is just going to depend. I mean, up until now, counties have really had, kind of free reign on those MHSA funds. And I know there is consternation around the slight carve off of those funds that is being redirected to state administration of these Prop 1 goals, but also that there's now these buckets that they're required to spend on. And so I think what I would say to county behavioral health or mental health directors is look at your current funding mix, look at Prop 1, see what is, what's cross-cutting, what are you funding now that could be fit into one of those required buckets in Prop 1. And I would say, at least again, knowing in my neck of the woods, Kern County, California, there are a range of things in there that can be classified as being compliant with Prop 1. The other piece, and this is, I think, very important, is there is a requirement around that a certain amount go towards housing, go specifically towards housing, and there is the allowance that you can spend on capital, which was not really the case for MHSA funds going previously. It was really meant for services only, and this gives a little bit more opening to it. And then I would just say, I mean, when you're looking at, the populations and the subpopulations that are being served here and that are being served and that are, really the most impact or the most ones that are using the most services in terms of the homeless or the unhoused community, you really are probably dealing with folks who have substance use and behavioral health challenges. So they are the demographics that, it's meaning to serve. So it's really just going to depend on each jurisdiction. But I think there is beyond, again, that, I think around 5% total, not in each jurisdiction, but 5% total of the funds are now going to the state that weren't going to the state, that were going to locals. Beyond that, I actually don't see much cause for consternation. I actually see that some of the components of Prop 1 actually allow counties to have a little bit more freedom. So, I mean, if it was me advising you and, the other folks in your continuum who are getting funded currently under what was MHSA funds and will be BHSA, it's, go in there and really go in with the kind of mindset of, no, there are programs in your current funding mix that can still be qualifying for these funds under this reform. And press them, what is your plan? What are you planning to do? What does the county think we need to do around some of these other buckets where you haven't been as engaged around, like, now BHSA funds can be used for housing. And then, the other side is this bond. And I think that's the other piece that we don't quite understand as well, because Prop 1 was the changes to how that tax was allocated and how it could be used, and the accountability functions that are now in it that require counties to report up to the state. But the other piece of Prop 1 was this bond, and we just don't know exactly how much and where those bond funds are going to be used yet. So that really, in my opinion, is kind of the biggest unknown at this point in time. But yeah, I've heard that across the state. Lots of folks, whether they're direct contractors or just engaged with their mental health directors, concerned about how Prop 1 is going to be implemented.
All right, thanks.
Mm-hmm. So switching from homelessness to labor laws. So one of the things that we're really focused on this year is our efforts to fix a law called PAGA, or the Private Attorney General's Act. So PAGA is a law that went into effect in 2004. It was one of the final initiatives of the Gray Davis administration when he was on his way out, when he was on his way to being recalled. And it is a remnant of a time when the state had extreme budget challenges. And so what PAGA does is it allows private rights of action in sort of like a class action style for labor law violations or wage and hour issues that you normally would and up historically would go to the labor commissioner. It allows employees to, basically sue their employer or former employees to sue their employer. And that the reason it's called the Private Attorneys General Act is that that lawsuit in effect functions as if the state was coming after that employer. What we've seen across the state since PAGA has been enacted, has been in place, but really over the past 10 years, we've seen an acceleration of this, is just employers getting getting hit with claims for really, really minor things. So things like a logo being on a paycheck as opposed to the company's name, or the company's doing business as name on a paycheck as opposed to a their legal entity name, or a paycheck that had route instead of drive in terms of the employee's address. No, they were not withheld wages. They were paid what they should have been. The employee wasn't harmed, but these minor violations with absolutely no ability to cure them are what start these PAGA claims. And in general, what happens is if you're an employer, you get hit with one of these PAGA claims, you are advised by your attorney to settle and try to get the best settlement possible. So what we see is, attorneys will file them. They'll file them kind of capriciously. They'll target a geographic area or a specific industry sector, and they will just hammer those local businesses with PAGA claims. And really a business, you do not want to take them to court. It will be, even if you win, it will be far more expensive. So you generally just settle. So what we're trying to do is basically return the power to the state. Say that the labor commissioner should have the staff, should have the ability to enforce this, and should have the ability to look at these. We want to provide employers with some additional things like opportunities to cure minor violations. We do not want to ever see an employee not get paid what they are supposed to get paid. But at the end of the day, what we've heard and what we know to happen is employers are basically getting hit with these, and we're seeing very little go to the actual employees. So for instance, we on our fixpaga.com website have a couple of testimonials from some nonprofits who have been hit with PAGA claims, because you don't have to be private sector. Anybody can be hit with one. And we've seen nonprofits that got hit with PAGA claims, and they have paid out hundreds of thousands of dollars in settlements, which are not going to service the populations that nonprofit is meant to service. And in almost every case, what we're seeing is that the trial attorneys are the ones that are getting the vast majority of these settlements. So hundreds of thousands of dollars to the attorneys that are filing these suits, and in one case, less than $1 to the employees in a settlement. In another case, $6 to an employee in a settlement, but hundreds of thousands of dollars going to the actual attorneys. So we have been working on this. We've qualified a measure for the November ballot. We have this Fix PAGA public affairs effort going on, trying to get more supporters on board as quickly as we possibly can, because we're trying to set the stage to, we will gladly fight this at the ballot box, but if we can convince legislative leadership and the governor of the need to deal with this and to not have a costly ballot fight, then we will definitely do that if it will result in real reform. We've seen labor be, really kind of, like this is not going to be an issue. And then now they've kind of switched, and now they're doing a big communications push on stop wage theft. That's been their talking points. There's been efforts to reform PAGA in the past. One of the things that was done under the Brown administration was some efforts around disclosure. So there's a state database that you can go and look at claims and notices of settlements and other things. And just, when I go and I talk about PAGA and I go into a region, I go to that database and I searched. And so 224 PAGA claims have been filed in the city of Modesto. It's not even Stanislaus County, it's just city of Modesto since 2009. And, I saw even, just last week, a PAGA claim was filed against a major nonprofit in the Modesto region. And that's what we're seeing. I mean, we're seeing a lot of Goodwills are huge targets for PAGA lawsuits. So this is an area where we are hoping to get some positive action for businesses and hopefully, really reform something that has really been an albatross around businesses' necks. We've got our 2024 job killer list. I won't go through all of these, but just some highlights. One of the things that's been very interesting, and I will say we have an incredible team of policy advocates that spend all day in the Capitol and work on their policy portfolios. They've done a great job this year. We had a list of, I believe, 13 job killers. We've killed 5 just in the last couple of weeks. So things are still alive. We've got a repeat of that SB 799, that unemployment insurance or unemployment for striking workers. We don't expect it to make it out this year, though we do expect it to make it out of the Senate. We just don't expect it to make it to the governor's desk. We'll see. On labor and employment, you'll see we killed a bill that really would prohibit most employers from considering conviction histories in employment or contracting decisions. We don't, we totally believe in second chances. We actually have some programming that we're working on around second chance hiring, but don't believe that employers should be constrained in this way. We've got a couple of other bills that should be important on the labor side. 2499 is one of the most important for small businesses. This expands uncapped leave relating to victims of crime, or if you're a relative of somebody who was victimized. And it basically lowers the threshold for the applicability of an existing program. Right now it's at 25 employees plus. Employers that have 5 employees plus would be subject to this, and basically you would have to provide nearly unlimited leave for somebody who was qualifying in terms of being victimized. And then probably the one that's gotten the most actual press, kind of national press, has been this AB 2751, which is the right to disconnect bill, which says, employers can only contact you within certain time periods. We really, are definitely against this, though, those of us on the Cal Chamber team joked that for those of us who are in the public affairs world, we'd love a right to disconnect. It's just not part of our jobs. So we may be the lobby for this, but I mean, in general, when you look at California post-pandemic, we finally have kind of cracked the code on a truly flexible workplace, a truly flexible work schedule. These hybrid type arrangements are what allows that. And frankly, the interconnectedness and the hyperconnectedness of our workforce is what allows employers to be comfortable, providing these hybrid and flexible work arrangements. I mean, the biggest actual opponents of this are really going to be in the innovation economy, the tech sector, because that's what they need. They need their employees, really working constantly and working at strange times. So we'll see where that goes, but that's gotten a lot of heat. We don't think that it will survive, but the author wanted to make a splash, and he did. Consumer products, we've got job killers, SB 903. It's making its way through the process. It seeks to ban the use of all of PFAS, what are called the forever chemicals. Unfortunately, they're in significant amount. I wouldn't say 100%, but significant amount of the consumer products that we use in our daily lives. And so then there really is no alternative at this point. So it would be very, very hard to comply with, and would result in Californians not having a host of products that they like in their daily lives. Environmental, just a couple of things. We've got the Polluters Pay Act, but then also we've got a constitutional amendment that enshrines a right to clean air and clean water in the California Constitution. It's not that we are anti-clean air and clean water, it's just that the potential unintended consequences of having something like that would be to basically shut down all land use, land development, whether it's housing, whether it's traditional energy development, whether it's green energy development, because that very, very, broad, small couple words, but a broad interpretation could mean that really anything that falls in disturbing land in any way would, negate that right. We got single payer back again, so basically creating, a government-run healthcare system. It is making its way through the process. It is attracting a lot of attention. While we expect it to get out of the assembly, this is not truly we think, serious single payer effort. Part of the reason why is that there wasn't even a effort to identify a funding source in the past. When single payer has faced or kind of like had a serious effort to try to push it, there were funding sources that would kick in, new taxes basically, to pay for it. And I mean, to pay for a program like this is multiples of the existing state budget. So definitely something that's unfeasible at this point in time. And then we had a number of things where the rest of our job killers, we were able to hold them. We had a bill that potentially was exacerbated the housing crisis by impeding housing production. It was an interesting wrinkle expansion of the state's antitrust statute. We had an AI bill that failed, and then we had just yesterday a bill that proposed a new tax on digital advertising revenue that failed the deadline. So these are our high priorities. We are positioned both in support and opposition to literally hundreds of pieces of legislation, but these are job killers. These are kind of what we would say, hate to say, the worst of the worst, and we're making progress on that front, but still significant challenges to employers in terms of these proposals making their way through the legislative process. So overall, wanted to talk about some things that we're doing, and then just talk to you about the kind of environment that we find ourselves in and how important it is that our business community speak up on policy issues. So, one of the things that we're really working on, and part of, my role at Cal Chamber is working across all of our divisions, our HR and compliance division and the products and the services they provide, our political initiatives led by Marty Wilson, our policy initiatives led by my colleague Ben Golenbeck, to try to really cultivate a sense of constant pressure in key legislative districts. What we hear so often is that our legislators are not hearing from their districts. And I think it's not that they're not hearing, it's that they're not paying attention. And so what we want to do is really find ways of, instead of everything being a game of, it comes down to a deadline in Sacramento and everybody's playing their kabuki, how do we actually cultivate a sense of constant pressure? How do we work with our regional allies to support us on the statewide initiatives, but also to have more of a two-way street? So often in the past, Cal Chamber has been, hey, we need our locals to get engaged on this issue. And then when our locals called and said, hey, we got a real problem in our neck of the woods, we'd be like, that we don't really get involved in local stuff. And that's changing. We don't have the bandwidth to be involved in every region of the state, but we are more engaged in things like regional minimum wage increase proposals. So, in Los Angeles, both in Los Angeles City and Los Angeles County, there's been efforts to do a $30 minimum wage for tourism workers, so hotel workers, airports, et cetera. We've been working directly with, our allies in that region led by LA Chamber to push back on this. Similarly, San Diego has just this week, same exact thing. And so we're already in talks with San Diego Regional Chamber to say, hey, how do we help you? How do we get this? Because the problem isn't, I think there used to be a sense that, okay, if that happens in some municipality, that's fine because that doesn't have applicability anywhere else. But if we see these types of policies get introduced and approved in Los Angeles, in San Jose, in San Diego, the amount of workforce in the state and then the amount of legislators that they have that are covered by these policies becomes a point where it becomes a tipping point. And it gets to a point where when this is proposed on a statewide basis, well, it's already happened. It's already the law for 50% of the California's workforce. Why do we care if we make it statewide? Well, because the economics in the Central Valley are significantly different than what they are in the Bay Area. The economics in North State are significantly different than what they are in LA, et cetera, et cetera. So we need to be more engaged, and we're monitoring things and engaging more on these regional issues. We've augmented our statewide political program as well. We're being much more aggressive and much more strategic, even with local engagement. Again, we used to focus just on statewide state legislators. What we're starting to do now, what we're starting to see from us is, trying to hold some of those folks accountable. And I'll talk about that in just a second. And then finally, we recognize now that we have to invest in and activate grassroots. We have heard over and over and over again how important small businesses are to the legislature and to the individual legislatures. Cal Chamber is very much viewed as being a big business entity. Yes, we represent the biggest companies in the state, but out of our 14,000 members, the vast majority of them are small businesses. And so we need to kind of flip the script a little bit and make sure that our legislators are hearing from regularly and robustly from the small businesses that are in their regions. So in terms of like what we're doing on like local politics, this is just some, interesting, fun stuff. We had a couple of legislators that are running for local offices. And so we had a legislator in the LA region running for LA County Supervisor, challenging a woman named Catherine Barger, who's a sitting supervisor, the only Republican on the LA County Board of Supervisors. And Assemblymember Chris Holden was challenging her, and looked to be, especially in terms of the money that he raised and his profile, looked to be a serious challenge. So we used his votes on a couple of bills last year, constitutional amendments that will be potentially on the November ballot, to reduce the thresholds for raising local taxes, to potentially loosen and weaken Prop 13. We used those against him in the race, and basically used his desire, we said, to gut Prop 13 against him in the March primary. Suffice to say, and interestingly, Catherine Barger, she was able to make it out of the primary and was able to win outright. There will be no general. And we did this in the Sacramento mayor's race as well. We had a assembly member who was running for Sacramento mayor. And again, we did a couple cute things. He was formerly on the city council before he was a legislator, and he was against the Kings Arena. And, I am, while I work in Sacramento, I am a dyed-in-the-wool Lakers fan, so I don't necessarily understand all of the light the beam, but I can say that, the Kings Arena, the Golden One Center, the success of the Kings has really been something that's been great for downtown Sacramento. You can actually really tell how much and how more the community's invested in the Kings than they were when they were, up to the north. So we use that against, this gentleman, Assemblymember McCarty, and called out a couple of other things, including he was one of the votes on those same constitutional amendments that potentially could raise taxes. He was the loudest critic of the arena, and then also, you may have heard of this proposal last year to ban tackle football for kids. So unfortunately, Assemblymember McCarty actually made it out of the primary and is in the top two for Sacramento mayor. But what we were trying to do is less about, get the result in this particular race. And it was send a message to legislators that we're not just like your engagement with us and our ability to hold you accountable and overall the business communities to hold you accountable doesn't stop when your term ends. It continues with what you want to do. So please hear our message. You're not going to be with us all the time. We are going to disagree. We are going to have ideological differences. But at the end of the day, we're going to have this more aggressive footing, and we are going to try to hold you accountable wherever you go. So finally, these are my last two slides, I promise. I like to talk about something called the Edelman Trust Barometer. And what is that? So Edelman is this big public affairs, public relations consultancy. They survey folks across the globe every year. And they do focus surveys both in the major markets, United States being one of them. And they try to get a sense of like, who does the public, who does the masses, who do they trust? Who are the best messengers? What messages move these people? How does things like business, government, the media, non-governmental organizations or nonprofits, how do they measure up against each other? And I think what has been interesting and what is continually surprises me is that what we see in terms of Edelman's findings year over year is that the business community is the only sector, when you talk about the media, the government, the NGO community, business is the only sector that is above water when it comes to who the public actually trusts. So the public trusts business above the media, above government, and above NGOs. And I think that's important because at times, again, we get stuck kind of like in our own myopic view of the world in the business community, that we take so many slings and arrows, we take so many hits that we think everybody's against us always. And that actually isn't the case when you talk to the general public. So when Edelman did their findings this year, they will kind of focus on certain things. One of the last couple of years, just given the results of the 2020 presidential election, 2022 midterms elections was just talking about partisanship and polarization over the last few years. But this year they kind of switched and talked about a range of things, especially around small businesses and then also innovation overall. And who does the public trust around some of these innovation advancements? So again, business is still the most trusted. It proved on ethics. 63% of the respondents trust business, 51% trust government. Business is really seen as a stabilizing force. And I think especially in the United States, given what we see happening in Congress and the continual upheaval, and this is not a partisan statement, this is just a statement of fact, the continual upheaval and the inability basically to coalesce around specific policies, including even funding the government, is really eroding in the United States, trust in government overall. When you look and dive deeper into these, trust statistics and what part of business do you trust? Family-owned businesses, so are small businesses, 70% of respondents trust those family-owned businesses to be messengers, to be folks who are saying, the truth, basically. This is, opposed to lower scores for, kind of publicly traded companies or the more corporate kind of looks. Business is the most trusted with innovation. So like the scores were middling all around. I think people are concerned about what's happening, especially with things like AI. But overall, the public trusts business more than they trust government and other sectors. But they're very much concerned. They view innovation as being poorly managed, that, we're hearing about these advances, but there is no plan for how we're going to integrate them, regulate them, or use them to grow the overall economy. And then finally, trust in these innovation areas really depends on our familiarity. So like green energy is embraced because, a considerable amount of the population has solar panels on their roofs, but skepticism is still there for things like artificial intelligence and how it integrates gene-based therapies, genetically modified foods. So you still see, especially in the innovation space. So why am I telling you all this? I'm telling you all this because I like to send this message to our local chambers and their members that you all are the most trusted messengers, and you just sometimes we don't even realize it. That you as the representatives of business and largely small businesses are the most trusted messengers when we're talking about policy and we're talking about its impacts on our economy and our communities. And so, what are we looking for from our chamber partners and from our, regional allies across the state? This is fast moving, especially what happens. And, luckily, I work with great people and they don't hold it against me from, the position of a Trish and Steven, the fact that I spam them probably 20 times in a day with like, this is the bill that I need you to engage on, or this is the policy today. But, quick action. So empowering your staff to quickly take positions within approved guidelines like policy platforms, flexibility, leaving room for interpretation in public policy platforms so your staff can, evaluate this and say, is this really fitting in this? Do I have the flexibility to engage on behalf of my membership here? Consistency, really communicating with your elected officials and doing it regularly, not just showing up when there's a problem, but, again, like I loved hearing your engagement with Senator Alvarado Gil. And then also, the fact that she's now not just engaged with you, but is saying, hey, I'm going to bring the leader of the House in. We're going to have some discussions, because that shows how important and those open dialogues that you have with your legislator. And then finally, grassroots. I get it. I was a hired hand. I'm still a hired hand. It's easier to send us into the fray, but legislators want to hear from you. They want to hear how it impacts your business. They want to hear, like, this is going to cause me to lay off X number of people. Or, I think one of my most effective public policy fire drills was putting the CEO of a local homeless center in front of a legislator and saying, I run a homeless center. We also run a domestic violence shelter. If you do this to me, you're going to put women and children on the street. So, that's a better message than anything I, as a hired hand on behalf of a chamber, could ever say. So the authenticity of your messaging is so important. So with that, I'm sorry for talking so long. I appreciate your attention. Open for questions. And again, just wanted to say thanks for allowing me to, present virtually. And again, can't say enough great things about Trish and the team at the Modesto Chamber. Really, really appreciate your partnership.
We've also had Councilman Ricky has joined us. I've seen it. Can you name that site that you do the POGA searches on again? I missed the site itself.
Yes, it is. I'll have to find it. I'll put it in the chat, because it is a weird URL. So I will put it in the chat right now. We were joking internally that it's a site, it's a Salesforce site. And I said, search Salesforce and see if they have a POGA claim against them. And they do. So they built the thing that discloses.
I will bridge. I have Trevin Barber here in the room. He is Economic Development Manager for the City of Modesto, and he would like an opportunity to connect with you. So I will do an e-introduction, but do you want to bridge what you're asking?
Yeah, sure. Happy to. Thanks, Nick, for the presentation.
Yeah.
Appreciate learning about the chamber and its members, priorities and legislative priorities. The City of Modesto and the City Council is empowering staff to conduct a strategic plan. So we're going to build a 5-year economic development strategic plan. We started that this year. It's going to take the next 6 to 8 months. And we're in the beginning part of the due diligence. Well, we would love some sort of collaboration or statement or letter of something from Cal Chamber that says, hey, it's great that you're working on strategic priorities. Here are things you need to consider for the next 5 years. And here are things that are important to the business community that you should consider as either legislative priorities or just, strategies that you need to think about.
Definitely would love to connect, and I think we can definitely be helpful there.
Any other thoughts or questions? I will share that we're working with Nick, who will be back later in the year to present to our GRC committee. And on May 17th, at our GRC meeting, we have Jenny and Seymour with US Chamber coming in person to present.
Excellent.
So people will be here. I don't know if we're going to have them still this year for EDC. We might have them both do it. Flip them off, but yeah, we've been very fortunate to have great working relationships with all of our legislators. To the point, we have both congressman reps here with us today. It's very common that we have the reps here. We really appreciate our engagement with them. Our county supervisor chair brought lieutenant governor here and did throughout the day breakouts. One was with law enforcement, one was healthcare, one was small business. And so I was fortunate enough to sit in on that conversation. There's a lot of great stuff going on here in Stanislaus County and Modesto, and touching on everything you just shared. Was listening to the whole time going, yep, well, there's a group working on that, there's some working on that. So we're all on the same, in the same book, basically, but it's connecting the dots in a broader way. So thank you for the messaging on that.
Yeah, and I would just say as an observer, I mean, like we've seen a number of things. And I'm sorry if and I apologize, this is my personal opinion, so I apologize if I step in it. But just to this point of like an economic development plan and a strategy for the city, and then I see opportunity Stanislaus is on. I mean, I think my former life as a Bakersfield chamber person, I would have loved to have the support from my city and my county in terms of economic development that we've seen in Stanislaus County. There's a lot of actual folks throughout the state, both in the Central Valley and in even some of the bigger regions, who have been really impressed by what you all are doing and the focus on how you're growing your economy. You may not think that, people are watching, but we are. And there is definitely a sense that you guys are ahead of the curve and doing it right in terms of trying to make these investments and strategies that are gonna grow the economy in your region.
Yeah,
Thanks for your presentation, Nick. Excellent information. I don't know the statistic precisely, but since 2016, California has lost over 240 major corporations. Do you see anything on the horizon that would indicate that that the legislature, the governor, other leaders are connecting the dots between companies leaving California due to strangulating regulations, high taxation, cost of living, lawlessness, whatever, with declining revenues, and actually taking moderating steps that might ameliorate that defection from the state?
I think it's a great question. I will say this just on a macro basis. I mean, we're the California Chamber of Commerce, so we do not like to promote the Cal exit narrative. That being said, there is no denying or arguing with the stats and with the facts. And what you have seen now is really a couple of things. The loss of the companies, as you've said, the loss of high income earners who make up a significant portion of the revenues that go into the general fund. And then you've seen the loss of the middle class. And so PIPIC put out the Public Policy Institute of California put out a study last year that kind of looked into this a little bit more and said, hey, the folks that are leaving, not necessarily anymore the high income earners, but now we're starting to hit the middle class. What we don't want is a California where it's the folks who can afford to live here and the folks who can't afford to get out. That is not the California that we want to develop. I will say, the bottom line comes to the fact that we really do have a governor and a legislature that is committed to a specific, not necessarily ideological, but a specific view of the economy. I mean, I remember sitting in a room with then candidate Newsom talking about his view of the economy and his proposal or his, kind of lodestar or example was Germany. High economic output, extremely high regulation, that the two things can go hand in hand. I think, you know, what we're seeing and given the state budget situation, given the challenges around things like homelessness and public safety, that we're testing the bounds, if not, you know, basically, you know, disproving that theorem. I think what you're seeing is a little bit more moderation by the legislature, but I think one of the things and one of the concepts that we've not quite been able to communicate is, you know, the legislature's super focused on small businesses. Small businesses will make, you know, that'll make the connection in a legislator's mind. When it comes to a proposal that's going to impact like a large corporation or corporations writ large, they kind of go, well, they can afford to pay for it. But I mean, that belies this concept of the economy, which is, you know, it's all interconnected. If you don't have these large corporations and big industry sectors driving a region's economy, then nobody's working and gaining income and patronizing the small businesses that you're seeking to defend. So we're trying to and hoping to really think about how do we change the message? How do we, one, activate more small businesses, but two, get our small businesses to also, you know, push forward the message around the fact that it really is interdependent. And then finally, I think, you know, what we have seen, which is less of a loosening of regulations, is the state looking at the economy over in a large way, looking at investments that it makes, looking at some of the activities that it has, and trying to harmonize all of those, trying to come up with a strategy overall for the state that devolves some of the power for determining where do some, you know, tax credit investments, where do some state investments go to regions. Part of that is the process that we've seen across the state and regions, which was formerly known as SURF, which is now known as California's Jobs First. And so that is more of a public sector investing in certain activities as opposed to loosening the regulatory environment. So I think what we're seeing is a resistance in the legislature to push forward significant amounts of new policy. It's going to be new regulations on businesses, and a focus by the administration on how do we grow the overall pie, but less on how do we start stripping away some of the regulations that are causing some of the friction that are preventing growth or causing people to move out of the state. Sorry, that was a long-winded and probably depressing answer to your question.
So I would answer your question absolutely different than that. All you gotta do is look at 2,000 new bills that they're trying to pass every year. Majority of them are either for new taxes or more regulations. Now tell me that any of them in Sacramento are connected to keeping businesses, large and small, healthy in this state. They're not. They don't care. If they cared, they wouldn't, every time they turn around, let's invent a new tax. Let's invent new regulations. And so if any of that, if we're paying any attention at all, our understanding should be there's anybody in Sacramento who cares about businesses and keeping businesses in California. And that's why they continue to lose businesses right and left, and will continue to do so. We keep electing the same socialist people to go to Sacramento. And until we change that cycle, which I don't believe that we will in my lifetime, it's going to continue. That's my 2 cents.
Well, I don't know if you had heard, Nick, but a separate entity through the beginning of SURF started here. It's referred to as North Valley Thrive, and it's regionalized with Merced, Stanislaus, and Salem. There's a lot of work being done there as well. So
And I think that the jury's still out on whether or not these SURF collaboratives will result in the goals that were set out for them. You already
commented, there's some very passionate and energized people here. So lot of potential. So we're coming up on time. Actually, you can have a foundation meeting to slide over to here in a few minutes. Nick, I really appreciate your time. I know you bring a whole new vision of things to us. We haven't had a presentation like this in a long time here, so thank you for that. John?
Yeah, I just, so June 5th is our next meeting, first Wednesday of the month. Speaker is Erica Ignacio, Deputy Executive Officer of Stanislaus County. She's going to talk about, she's the newly in charge of the Crow's Landing Business Park. And so we had reached out to her a couple months ago. She had, I think, just got the job like the week before. And so she said, I need a few months. So she'll be here. And then in July, I think it'll be second, is it the first week or second week of
We moved it
July?
to the 10th.
It's on the 10th after the holiday. Farm Bureau is going to be here. Katie with the Farm Bureau will be here. Stanislaus County Farm Bureau to talk about kind of, you know, and one of the things that I requested is that they kind of address like, what's the feeling long term of the nut crops here in the valley and that here in the valley, that's changing. That's changed the last couple of years. So anyways, look forward to having you guys back. Thank you for coming. Thanks. Thank you, Nick.
Thank you, Nick.
Thank you.
Bye, Nick. Thank you. Talk to you soon.